In this lecture, we're going to learn about using declarations. And this is a facility we have in the C++ programming language to be able to call things that live inside a namespace without explicitly specifying the namespace name. Let's see how this works. We have seen that we can set up different classes in our geom namespace using the syntax here. For example, this is a header file for our point class. We could do the same thing for our line class. As you see here, it's living inside our geom namespace. And we could do the same thing for our cylinder class. Again, it is living inside this namespace here. If we want to use these classes that live inside the namespaces, we have seen that we had to prefix everything with the namespace name. And if you are using these things a lot, typing the namespace multiple times can really be annoying, and sometimes you want to avoid that. Using declarations are a facility we have in the C++ programming language to avoid typing these namespaces a lot of times if you don't want to do that. So how does this work? Well, we have two syntaxes we can use. If you look here, we have two syntaxes, and I am going to tell you the difference between them. The first one is going to just bring in a name inside the namespace. And the syntax to do that, you say using explicitly, as you see here. You say the namespace name, you say colon, and then you say the name you want to import that you want to use without prefixing that with the namespace. If we do something like this, we will be able to create point objects without specifying the namespace, and I want you to know that. The second one we can use is what you see here, and you say using namespace, you say the namespace name, and this is going to bring in the entire namespace, and you will be able to use things inside that namespace without adding the namespace name prefix. Okay, so if you go down, you're going to see another example. You can say using namespace math. This is going to bring the entire math namespace in. If you say using math add, this is only going to bring in the add name from the math namespace. And we're going to see a few examples of how this works. I realize this may be confusing at this point, but don't worry, we're going to see an example and you're going to see how all this comes together. Okay, once you have brought in your namespace, you can then create things without using namespace prefixes. You see, we can create a point without adding geom, colon. We can create line objects. As you see down here, we can call the add function without specifying the namespace where it's living. But this also works for built-in namespaces. For example, if you say using stdcout and using stdendl, you will be able to say cout hello and endl without specifying the std namespace here, and this is going to work. You can even bring in the entire std namespace using the syntax here, but this is not recommended because then your names are going to conflict with the things that live inside the standard namespace, and that's going to be really bad. Okay, now that you have an idea about this, let's head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Okay, here we are in our working folder. The current project is using declarations. We're going to grab our template files, or I think we're going to be using the files we have created in our geometry or geom project here, the cylinder, the line, and the point. So we're going to grab things from this project here. I think that's going to be easier to handle. So we're going to grab the files that we need. We're going to grab the main CPP file. We're going to grab the point CPP file. We're going to leave out the executable because we don't really want that. We're going to copy these things, and then we're going to go in our current project. I think this is going to be better. It's going to save us a few seconds. Now that we have this, we're going to open this little guy in Visual Studio Code. Let's do that. Okay, we have our project open here. And you see that to be able to use things from the geom namespace, we had to specify the geometry namespace here. And sometimes this may be annoying if you are typing these things maybe 100 times or more. So we're going to use using declarations to make these things simpler. We're going to start with our point class here. We can go in and say we don't want to specify the namespace name when we create point objects like this. And this is what we want. We want the syntax here to work. And we're going to use using declarations to do that. So we're going to say using geom, and we're going to say point, to mean that the point class name is what we want to bring in. And the moment we do that, you're going to see that the problem here is going to go away, and this is going to work. So this is just bringing in the name from the namespace. Okay, I want you to know that this is the first syntax we can use to do this. But the second syntax you can use is to bring in the entire namespace. And you do that by saying using namespace. And you're going to say the namespace name. I don't think we need this thanks that Visual Studio Code is auto-completing for us. We're going to say geom. And this is going to bring the entire namespace. And if we do this, even the things we have below here, for example, the line and the cylinder, are going to work without specifying the namespace name. You can see that this is going to make your code easier to read, but I think it is going to be confusing because people won't know these things are going to be living in namespaces. They have to hunt this line down to be able to understand your code. But I'm going to leave this decision to you. If you want to use these using declarations, please use them. If you don't want them, you can specify your own namespaces like we did before, and either choice is going to work. Let's try and build this. We're going to build with GCC. You're going to see that the build is going to be good. And we can bring up a terminal to play with this a little more so that we can run the application and show you that it is working. We have our point, we have our line, and we have our volume printed out. And this is really cool. To play with this further, we're going to add a few functions that live in a header file called operations and a CPP file called operations.cpp. So we're going to add those files here. Let's go on top here and add operations.h. And we're going to also add operations.cpp. We are going to jump in the header file and put in our code. We have the namespace here. And we don't have an include guard on this header file, so let's grab an include guard from some other file, and we're going to adapt this a little bit. I think that's going to work better, saving us a few typos. Let's grab the ending of this little guy. Let's grab cylinder.h, and we're going to see the ending of that thing. We can go to the end and do that, and then we're going to say operations.h here. Let's say operations. And we can say operations here. And we're going to say operations down here. Okay, we're good here. We are also going to put in our CPP file. Again, if we look at our operations here, it's just setting up a simple example we can play with. We have add, sub, mult, dev functions to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And we have two sets of these functions here. One set is going to just do the operations. It's not going to do any adjustment. And another set is going to do the adjustment. Upon further investigation here, I see that the functions from the math namespaces are doing the adjustment that they shouldn't do. So I'm going to fix this a little bit. Sorry for this if you find this confusing, but this is programming. We make mistakes and we fix them. That's the important thing. So let's do that. We're going to remove our adjustment here, and we're going to make sure that the adjustment is done in our weighted namespace here. And we're going to see that we don't need this minus here. What was I doing when I typed this code? But this is working. The important thing is that these functions are living in separate namespaces. We have a set of functions which is going to just do the operations. It's just going to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And we have a set of functions which is not just going to do the operations, but it's also going to do an adjustment. We're going to subtract. And suppose this is something important for whatever operation you are doing in your C++ program. The important thing is that we have these namespaces, and we can use using declarations to make things simpler. Another thing we're going to do is to head over in our main function and put in another add function. So for example, if we go down here and put in our add function, it's going to say add. We're going to say that it lives in the global namespace, and it's just going to do something silly. It's going to add up the numbers, and it's going to add 0.555 And we're just going to see that we can call this function here. Now, what happens if we go in our main function and call the add function? Let's do that. We're going to put a separator here, and we're going to go down here and say add. Okay, which one is going to be called? Well, the C++ compiler is going to see that we have an add function here. We need to specify the parameters. Let's say 10 and 20. This is going to satisfy our compiler. The compiler is going to look in the global namespace. It's going to say, I have an add function. I am going to call that. Let's build and show that this is actually the case. Okay, the world should be good here. We're going to clear and run Rooster. Clear and run Rooster. We're going to see that we are calling the add function from the global namespace here. So what happens if, for example, we go down here and say using math add? We can say this. The moment we do this, we're going to see a squiggly line, and this is problematic because we didn't include the operations header. So let's do that. Operations. And now this is going to be valid syntax, but the add name is going to be confusing to the compiler. Now the compiler is going to see the add function call here, and it's going to look on top here. It's going to say, I have an add function from the global namespace, but I also have an add function from the math namespace that I can call. And this is going to be confusing to the compiler. I want you to know this. So we're going to try and build this with GCC, and we're going to get an ambiguous compiler error. I think that's what we're going to get. We're going to see double math add double conflicts with a previous declaration of add, which is here. So the compiler is seeing two declarations for the add functions, and it doesn't know which one to use. Okay, we're going to see the same problem if we also bring in the entire math namespace. For example, if we say using namespace and say math, for example, we're going to have the same problem. We're going to build. You're going to see that build finished with errors, and we're going to see that we have two functions that could service the same call, and this is really bad. So if you want to call the add function, you have to be sure you know which one you are calling. So for example, we can take out all these declarations and come here and, for example, say math, and specify that we want to call the add function from the math namespace. If we try to build this, this is going to work. Let's bring this up a little bit so that you can see. You're going to see that the build is good. And if we run this, we're going to see that we are calling the add function from the math namespace. If we say math weighted, we can say that. And build and run this application. We're going to see that the build is good. If we run Rooster, we're going to see that now we are calling the add function from the weighted namespace, and this is really cool. You really have to know this. But the important message here is that we can use the using declarations to bring in namespaces and use them without specifying the namespace like we do here. And this is really cool. We have two syntaxes. We can bring in specific names, or we can bring in the entire namespace, and you're going to have to choose whatever you think is better for you. The last thing I want you to see in this lecture is that we can also use using declarations on built-in namespaces. So let's see that pretty quick. We can bring in cout and endl, and we're going to say using std cout and using std endl, and we can say cout hello world here. And this is going to work because we have brought in these names from the std namespace. If we build and run this application, you're going to see that it's going to work. Okay, the build is good. We can clear and and run Rooster. We're going to see that we are saying hello world, but we are not specifying the namespaces when we issue our cout statement here. And some people prefer to do things like this, but I prefer to specify the namespaces where my things are living. This is one syntax we can use, but we can also bring in the entire std namespace. Now you know how to do that. We can say using namespace std, and this is going to bring in the entire std namespace, but this is also going to work. But I don't really recommend this. because this is going to bring in the names from the STD namespace, and they are going to conflict with things you do in your own code. This is basically going to be the same problem we saw when we were playing with the add function. We had an add function that we defined ourselves here in the global namespace, and it was conflicting with functions from the math and math-weighted namespaces. So you need to be very careful. But the decision is going to be yours because you know the specifics of your project. So I'm going to leave that decision to you. This is really all I had to share in this lecture. I hope you found it interesting. We are going to stop here in this one. In the next one, we're going to learn about anonymous namespaces. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.